Let's talk now to Stefan Boscia, UK trade reporter at Politico, because let's find out precisely what Rishi Sunak has done this week and precisely how it will affect the relations between London and Brussels, and precisely what will happen possibly coming up this afternoon at Prime Minister's Questions, which comes off live here at midday, of course. Stefan, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Happy to be here. Right now I think Rishi Sunak is very happy with how his deal has landed. Tory MPs, on the whole, seem to be supportive, even the ones that were rumoured to potentially be, ready to rebel, i.e. Boris Johnson and the Truss and their respective acolytes. They've all sort of washed away, and then there hasn't really been much dissent. The one thing which I think will most worry him is the fact that there have been some sounds from the DUP, Northern Ireland, that they're not necessarily willing to support the deal. And of course, their support is absolutely key to get Stormont back convening, to get them back into the power sharing agreement. Right now, what we have some of the more hardliners of the party, like Sammy Wilson, saying that we don't necessarily think that this will be a deal that we can support. But I think that it would take weeks for people, including lawyers from the party, to pore over the details and see if this is something they can agree to.
Yeah, I mean, interesting, isn't it, that quite a few commentators have been quite negative about the deal. One in The Spectator yesterday basically saying that this is not even a legal document. It's a kind of political agreement. It doesn't really have any standing in law. And actually, if you read the EU's version of what we've agreed, it's completely different to the British version. So, I mean, I wonder why so many so-called Brexiteers and sceptics would go along with it.
Well, I think that a lot of people just want this issue to be put to bed, and a lot of people just want things to be, back to normal somewhat. And I think the deal, clearly, what it does do is it does reduce some of the trade barriers between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But I think some of the caveats and some of the problems we're seeing is that some of the, some of the things that Rishi Sunak has said around Northern Ireland having control over new regulations and having, the ability to stop the EU imposing new laws, some of this is starting to be picked out of it. And the reality, it seems, from what the EU is saying, is that overall, that Brussels will still have major control over new regulations, and that any sort of idea of Northern Ireland being able to override it would only be in very specific circumstances.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a bit of a way to go, but I think it's also understandable that a lot of Tory MPs just want to move on and want to be, a more united party, especially as the election.
And I mean, I think in fairness, what we can say and what everybody could agree on is that things in Northern Ireland will become easier. If you are living there, you won't have to go through all these hoops that you used to have to jump through in order to send a package to Britain in the mainland of GB. You won't have to have packages that are sent to you filled out with loads and loads of forms. You will be able to buy sausages and seed potatoes. I mean, I know it sounds all a bit trivial, but apparently it has been pretty awful there. So at least it's going to improve in Ireland, I think, in Northern Ireland. But what then happens in the future is what people who are critical of it seem to be worried about.
Well, that's just right, Mark. I mean, you've had the ridiculous situation where businesses in Great Britain couldn't send sausages or seed potatoes to Northern Ireland,
right,
within the same country. I mean, it's clearly an untenable situation. And I think that the fact that businesses of overall and business groups have welcomed the deal is the fact that it has fixed those problems and it has fixed those trade barriers in the REC. But I think that there are existential questions which the DUP have around their future in the union and how much control they will have over their regulatory regime. And I think that these are the sort of questions that will continue to rumble on, especially if the DUP continue to have such a hard line, and their line is essentially that they want the most minimal amount or zero amount of EU interference, which seems very difficult to
I mean, people that I've spoken to who are critical of the deal, including Anne Widdecombe and Ben Habib, have both basically said that this all falls down around its own ears if the DUP refuses to accept it and refuses then to get back into Parliament in Stormont in Northern Ireland with the power sharing agreement. Because all of the kind of the new shall we say, regulations, for want of a better word, or the new kind of rules for Northern Ireland are only applicable if there is a government.
That's right, and I think that was a part of the negotiating strategy for Rishi Sunak. It was, if you want these, potential powers over your own laws, then you have to get back and sit around the table in Stormont. But, I mean, I think the DUP at this point think it's almost easier for them not to, reconvene the Assembly, and they can sort of put off a lot of these issues. especially if they think that they're being sold a pup, and in the long term they're going to be sold down the river, which has happened before. I mean, look with the protocol when it was first signed, the DP never supported it because they thought that it fundamentally separated Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. So the fact that they may be ready to not support this deal makes a lot of sense because they never agreed to the principle.
No, absolutely right. Stefan, thank you very much indeed. Good to talk to you. Stefan Boscia, the UK trade reporter from Politico.